Thank you guys for joining this morning. We are here to talk about an upcoming opportunity for districts. You should have received an email which had the invite to this meeting here, doing a quick overview of an upcoming grant opportunity and an opportunity for a set of TA providers and ESCs to support districts in this work. So today we're just going to do a very broad overview of what this grant opportunity is, how we want TA providers to plug into that, and then a little bit more about the application process. Some quick intros, and we actually have several other people here from the team as well. But I see lots of familiar faces here, so great to see those that I've worked with in the past. For those that are newer here, my name is Leslie Hesketh. I'm the Director of Adoption Strategy at the Texas Education Agency. Our team sits within our Division of Instructional Materials and Implementation. So our division as a whole deals with a lot of the CRMSI implementation supports and helping districts implement the HQIM that the agency has developed. My team specifically done a lot of pre-adoption and adoption supports to help districts through a successful adoption process and lead them to high quality instructional materials. So Victoria is here for my team as well, and I'll let her do a quick intro.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for being able to attend today. My name is Victoria Garrett. I'm an educational specialist here at TEA, working directly with this particular grant opportunity. So hopefully we'll get to know each other as we continue on through this process.
Great, and Victoria is going to help man the chat a bit. So I know that you guys are probably used to webinar logistics here, but please mute yourself while you're not speaking. We have a somewhat big group here, so you can leverage the chat if you have questions while we're going. If you do have longer questions, we've got a question form with a QR code here. So if you're somebody who likes to take notes and jot things down while you're going, feel free to go ahead and scan that QR code with your phone, and you can just jot down longer questions as we go. We are going to try and leave some time at the end to actually just do some Q&A here with this group, but we likely won't get to all questions. So please feel free to use that as a form to submit those questions to us, and we'll follow up with questions, responses either directly or through an FAQ. And then, like I said, Victoria will be manning the chat. So if you guys do have any quick questions, feel free to drop them in there. So quick overview of what we're going to do for the next hour. We're going to do a high-level overview of what this grant opportunity is for districts. So I think it's always helpful to ground us in what the district experience is going to be for this grant. So we'll go over from a high level that process, and then start to dig into what we want approved providers that are approved through this application process to actually support districts with through this grant opportunity and what that looks like. And then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on the application process. And then, like I said, leave some time for questions and answers towards the end. So starting from our 10,000-foot view here, the name of the grant that we're talking about, the districts will have an opportunity to apply to this summer, is called the Strong Foundations Math and Literacy Framework Development Grant. So at the core of it, this grant is supporting districts building out a content-specific instructional framework. You may hear that others refer to this as an instructional vision that's meant to help guide districts in a lot of their instructional decisions and rooting back in this framework. So starting even from a little bit higher, this grant, I think it's helpful to name, is actually part of a larger grant program called the Strong Foundations Grant Program. So the intent of the Strong Foundations Grant Program, and I included the statute down here because this grant program is included in statute, is intended to provide supports to districts to help get more third graders reading on grade level. So the larger Strong Foundations Grant Program is actually a suite of supports that the agency will be supporting over the next 2 to 3 years. And this is one component and really the first grant to come out to support districts through that bundled supports. So this Math and Literacy Framework Grant, like I said, is just a component of the larger Strong Foundations Grant Program. And this specific grant is really honing in on providing districts foundational planning supports that helps build the why behind a lot of instructional changes. We know that there's been changes thrown at districts left and right as they've had to adapt post-COVID. And a lot of that, with a lot of those decisions, like quite frankly, districts just haven't had the time and space to really ground in the why behind all of those changes for their district. So this work is really supporting districts to get there and to bring stakeholders along in the process and actually end up with a district adopted instructional framework for math or literacy. This is a high-level look at this larger Strong Foundations grant program. And like I mentioned, this is the first grant coming out as part of this bundled support. So the larger grant program is really going to look at 3 different buckets of supports. The first being the one that we just touched on, this foundational district planning supports. And this framework development grant is a component of that. The second big bucket is critical implementation supports. So providing summer and year-long job embedded training for district and school administrators, coaches, teachers, et cetera. And some of these supports may look familiar if you've worked with TA in the past or are already an approved vendor through TCOS or a similar initiative, because we're going to be looking to align a lot of previous supports we have into the Strong Foundations grant program moving forward. And then the last bucket here is aligned resource subsidies. So depending on funds we have available, we would love to continue to help districts cover costs like materials, stipends, and other incentives we know that help districts implement large changes like this. So honing in a bit more specifically on this grant opportunity, the Strong Foundations Math and Literacy Framework Development Grant. Like I mentioned, the overall goal of this grant is for a district to walk away with a content-specific instructional framework that's adopted by the district and aligned to the research of how kids learn. So districts are going to be engaging in a process to actually build out this framework as they go throughout the grant opportunity and actually end up with something that they have in hand and can implement within their district. So at a very high level, this grant will, for districts, will cover a collective learning process that helps districts take a step back and relearn the research of how kids learn in math or literacy, depending on which framework they want to engage in. And this learning is supported by ESCs or approved vendors so that all district personnel can be active learners. This grant will help provide change management and stakeholder engagement support. So again, so the district can really focus on building out the framework and effectively get buy-in as they're going. And then the districts will get access to project management capacity to help manage the process from start to finish, knowing that there's a lot of moving parts in there. And we want to make sure that the district's focus is on building out a really strong framework that they believe in and that they can implement. We developed this grant opportunity really from a lot of lessons learned over the last couple of years. For those that have stayed in tune with what TEA is doing, we've been ramping up a lot of implementation supports with districts implementing HQIM or high quality instructional materials. And with that, there's just a lot of changes at the district level that a lot of districts haven't had the time to engage in some of this stakeholder engagement work and really some of this foundational planning that really does need to happen. So in a lot of ways, we heard that districts were having troubles with that. They started to look a bit more into their data, and there was a shared understanding of what they were doing wasn't working currently. They took a step back and started to relook at the research, knowing that the research is evolving and some of it's very different than what they had started out their education career as. And with that, we noticed a lot of districts engaging in this collective learning series and taking this step back to do a deeper look into the research. From that, we've seen a couple really successful Texas districts actually create a new literacy or math framework and including other subject areas that's grounded in this research. And using this framework to root a lot of their instructional changes so that there is a shared understanding of the why behind those changes. So you can see on the right here, this led to a lot of different things, but I think first, top of mind for that we've seen districts come out of this with is that they've been able to align a lot of their decision-making back to this framework that is agreed upon and adopted by the district. Some key areas that we see this supporting in their decision-making is with STAR redesign. So a lot of districts are looking to make big instructional changes to support their kids to be more successful on the new STAR test. And with that are some pretty significant changes if, again, you've been following some of the changes that are coming with STAR redesign. So we've seen a lot of districts use these frameworks to actually build out a new assessment strategy and kind of, again, root in the why of why they're making some of those changes to prep kids for STAR. We see a lot of districts that build this ideal state, this new framework, and realize, hey, we actually need new instructional materials because our materials aren't going to allow us to achieve this ideal state. So it may lead to a material swap or a new adoption process. And then there may just be some districts that haven't done this work, and after they do it, they realize they have strong materials, but some of their instructional decisions do need to change to better align to help get their teachers, their coaches, their school and district leaders to be working towards this ideal state. And that may lead to changes in how they train their teachers, observe their teachers, and coach teachers along the way. I promise I'll pause in a second for questions if you guys have them before we get too deep into this, but we will be taking districts through a 5-step process to building out an instructional framework for math or literacy. So I won't go into too much detail on each step, but at a high level, districts are going to kick off this process by building a roadmap that essentially outlines who are the stakeholders you're going to engage in this work. So what is your team that you're going to be actually taking through the collective learning series and soliciting feedback from? What are you trying to backwards plan from? So we will get to some timeline slides, but we want to make sure districts are aware of when key decisions need to be made so that they can effectively backwards plan their own timeline to be able to make those decisions down the road using their new framework. Looking at their current data and developing decision-making protocols so that all of that is agreed upon before they actually engage in this work. Then they'll move into step 2, which is building out a communications plan. I think first and foremost, it's great to have a framework, and a lot of districts have something similar like this in place, but if you don't do a good job communicating it, nobody's going to know it exists. So we want to make sure we're setting up districts for success and helping them build out a really strong communications plan prior to development of that framework. And then one of the bigger components of this grant is going to be a collective learning series where districts will actually take some time to do that collective step back and relook at the research again in math or literacy based off of which one they're engaging in. And this is something that'll be led by ESCs or approved TA providers to deliver a collective learning series on the research of how kids learn in math or literacy. After that training series, they'll be able to take all of those lessons learned, stamp some of those collective takeaways, be able to adapt it to their local context, and start to build out a new math or literacy framework, and then go through iterations, then ultimately get to a point where they can vote on that framework as a district. And then obviously that leads us into the last step, step 5, of building out an implementation plan that actually allows the district to put this framework into action. Some of the benefits for districts engaging in this work, we will be doing a similar very in-depth webinar with districts next week, and we'll highlight that, but there'll be some more in-depth information coming out about this. So this is again like the 10,000-foot view. But for districts that do engage in this grant opportunity, they're going to be receiving funding for technical assistance from an approved vendor or an ESC to facilitate this collective learning series, like I mentioned, and provide project management and stakeholder engagement support throughout the duration of building out the framework. We're going to ask districts to participate in a community of practice. That's going to be run by TEA, but we want to get district leaders talking and discussing some of the challenges they're facing in the process. And something we've seen be really successful across other opportunities that districts have engaged in is actually getting them out to other districts and seeing this in action. So we've got a pool of districts that have done this work really well before, and we want to allow them to use some of their funds to be able to actually get out to other districts and see how this works. Districts will be receiving funds to support a project manager and committee members through stipends. We will leave some flexibility up to the district if they decide they want an FTE or a full-time employee to support this work, but in most cases, we don't think that's needed. We will be building out a suite of exemplars to support districts and building out some of these key deliverables. And the role of their approved vendor, ESC, will be helping them customize those to really fit their local context as they go. And then something that I think is really important to note here is that districts who do apply and receive this grant will receive priority for future TA grants that are aligned to literacy and math supports. And this goes back to that larger Strong Foundations grant program, that we see this as a key foundational planning support. And we believe that districts who are can engage in this work from the get-go are going to be more successful with other implementation supports or adoption supports down the road. So this is going to really set them up for success. And we want to be able to make sure districts have access to all of those supports down the road if they want it. And then obviously there's requirements associated with each of these as well, where they do need to actually contract with an approved vendor or an ESC to do this work. They do need to attend to those monthly communities of practice. They need to have a point person and a project manager supporting this work. They've got to develop these committees to actually go through that collective learning process and submit artifacts and progress as they're going. And then per any grant, we're going to send out some surveys and run some focus groups towards the end to make sure that we're also improving our own processes. Okay, last couple of slides. I'm going to pause for a second for some questions. For timeline of this grant, we actually have a couple different options for districts to apply to this grant. The one that's going to be most important for you guys to hone in on today is going to be this timing option 1. And these 2 timing options are backwards planning from when we want districts to actually start putting this framework into action and engaging in supports that are going to help them get to this ideal state. So when we look at timing option 1, the timeline here is backwards planning from school year 23-24, when we anticipate districts will be putting this framework into action and engaging in those aligned supports. For that to happen, that kind of puts us at an application period that's going to open today. So it's opening very, very soon. We've had a little bit of a lag to getting it posted, but it's going to be up today. And then districts are actually going to have 2 closing dates this summer to accommodate districts who want to get started in this work right away so that they can really get kicked off with this at the beginning of the school year in August, but then also accommodate a later closing date in case districts just need some more time to think through this, which makes sense because this is a very quick turnaround time. So we're going to leave the application open again from today through the end of August, but we're going to go ahead and close those applications and process and award districts at these 2 timelines, the end of July and then again at the end of August. Once districts are processed and awarded, they can go ahead and start working and getting their contracts in place and start with some of those planning components. The majority of this option 1 timeline for the actual grant activities are going to take place again from August, September, hopefully wrapping up at the latest at March. We know that if districts are making a material swap or looking for implementation supports, that print is a real big barrier. And we know that that needs to likely be ordered at the latest February or March for districts to actually get some of those in hand before the next school year. So those are some of the key dates we're backwards planning from. We are also going to offer a longer runway for districts that are just not quite ready to engage in this work on such a short timeline. So we will be rolling out an option 2 timeline for this grant in the winter, where we will open up an application around November, close that sometime late December, January, and then award into the spring. And districts will have a bit longer time if they choose this option 2 to engage in the grant activities where they can even plan some of this collective learning over the summer and then use some time in the fall to be able to actually create a framework. And that gives them really school year 23-24 as a planning year, which is great for a lot of districts before they actually start engaging with what we're calling year 1 implementation supports for school year 24-25. I'm sure those timelines are clear as mud for a lot of people hearing them for the first time, but you'll have access to these slides and can go back and look at some of those as well. We are going to start rolling out a lot of district-facing informational sessions this summer. We really want to be able to give districts a taste of what they're getting into prior to them actually applying to the grant. We are going to be rolling out the grant application for the district in a similar way to T-Class if you supported that or heard through the grapevine the application process that districts went through with that. So it'll be a very short application that essentially just allows the district to check that they want to do this. They'll have to agree to the assurances with this grant as well. But from there, they'll be eligible to be awarded for this grant. So because the application process is such a light lift, we really do want to give them a taste of what they're getting into before they do that. So we're going to be running a couple different district panels throughout the summer so that districts can hear from other districts that have done this work before. We're going to be running some research overview series that really do give a preview of some of these research topics that's aligned with STAR redesign. And then we'll have like the normal grant kickoff webinars, and we're going to have 2 options for those just to give districts more flexibility to attend. I'm showing all these because we would love for you to attend these opportunities if you were interested in supporting districts through this grant. I have a little box over here and I want to call this out so that it's clear to everyone here. These are district-facing opportunities. So I think it is incredibly helpful for potential vendors and ESCs to sit in on these opportunities to make sure that we're all hearing the same information, and that just allows you to learn a little bit more about this opportunity as well. But we do ask that if you or someone from your team attends, that you are simply there as observers. So that means you do not engage in any of the trainings or the panels, that you are just there as observers. If we do catch wind of vendors or ESCs jumping into these and coming off mute and asking lots of questions or being really active in the chat, we will ask you to not attend future sessions. So please just be cognizant of that these are definitely catered towards districts, and we want to keep it that way. And we would appreciate any and all feedback and comments you have after the fact, and you can just shoot us an email with that. Okay, I'm going to pause for about a minute and see if you guys have any questions. You can either throw these in the chat or just come off mute. We'll just spend about 2 minutes here, and we'll save all further questions for the end. Use my teacher wait time, see if any questions that bubble up. It's a good question. Is it a competitive opportunity? So we will be awarding based off of districts that have lower literacy scores in 3rd grade. However, we do have a budget for this grant, and if we do not award up to that budget, then we'll be able to accept everyone who agrees to the assurances and submits an application successfully. So competitive, but we do have a relatively large budget to be able to, what we believe will support all districts who want to apply to this opportunity.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for all this great information. Just figured I'd come off mute real quick. We support districts through RSSP and ESF as well. And as you know, for the RSSP process, there's the research-based instructional strategies for ELAR and math. And so I was just curious around kind of how you all envision the alignment between kind of those various existing strategies that TEA kind of endorses, and then also through, the effective schools framework as well.
That's a great question. And we're going to touch on some of this when we get to the trainings, but I'll speak to it at a high level so everybody can have that knowledge going into it. For the research-based instructional strategies, that is a lot of the trainings that districts are going to engage in when we talk about that collective learning series. With RSSP in particular, the training series that districts engaged in were like the mini versions we put together for the RBs. We typically run those trainings over the course of 2 or 3 days to really be able to go deep on each instructional strategy that's pulling on the some of the key research that's coming out in math and literacy. So I do think that there's still a lot of benefit for districts that have maybe had a taste of this, because it'll allow them to just go a lot deeper. And I actually think it pairs well with districts that maybe have tried this work with an RSSP or other initiatives, but haven't quite had the time to really go deep on it. I see one question in the chat. Will the award amounts vary by district size, or is it a fixed amount for all districts? So it will vary by district size, but we will make sure that our smaller districts are taken care of, because we want them to be able to engage in this grant opportunity as well. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, but if you guys do have questions, feel free to continue to drop them in the chat or record them on that form we had. All right, so I'm going to spend some time digging into the roles and responsibilities for approved vendors or potential approved vendors that are supporting districts in this grant. So again, what I just went through was the district experience. I'm flipping it to now be more of the approved provider experience. Starting again from a very high level, and to recap what the overall goal of this grant is before we get into some of the details, is that districts walk away from this grant with a research-based math or literacy framework that is adopted and implemented by the district. So for any ESC or approved providers supporting districts in that work, this is the ultimate goal that we're trying to get to. There's a lot of things that get to that end goal, and we've highlighted some of those here. That vendors will help districts co-create a roadmap that actually guides them through this process. And that's a lot of the planning components they'll engage in from the get-go. Build out that communications plan. Approved providers will actually design and deliver the collective learning series and the research of how kids learn. And this gets to the question that Monica was asking around that this is essentially what we call at TA or RBs, or research-based instructional strategies. Vendors will support development, feedback, and finalizing of the district math or literacy framework. So there's going to be a lot of leadership coaching involved in this work. They'll support in the creation and submission of an implementation plan so that we know that districts are actually going to move forward and start to put this into action. And then obviously support districts in monitoring, collecting, and reporting data throughout the grant. We want to be able to take a lot of the burden off of districts. And TA providers in this instance are going to be our middleman to be able to see how districts are doing, and y'all will be submitting information directly to us. And then something that we'll get to at the very end of this grant is actually developing a very brief case study that outlines the district process from start to finish. We know that there's a lot to learn in this space, and we've done our research to kind of crowdsource what we've seen as best practice, but this process is going to look very different in a lot of different districts based off of district size, an ISD versus a charter. There's a million different ways that this can be customized and really operationalized well within different local contexts, and we want to be able to learn from that. So we'll be asking TA providers to develop, again, just a brief case study that outlines what this process was for all of the LEAs, so that we can continue to improve our own supports. This is going to get pretty detailed. So again, you guys will have access to these slides afterwards. I'm not going to go and read through everything, but know that this has a lot of information on here that I do recommend you read up on after the fact. This is split into 3 parts. So the first part on how you actually get on the Strong Foundations approved provider list. One that's how you maintain on that list, and then one that's kind of future looking. So to be able to get on the Strong Foundations approved provider list, we've got 5 key non-negotiables that we're asking TA providers to agree to before they dig in. It is completing the actual application and indicating minimum capacity of districts that your organization can support. We know that there's a lot of supports districts are getting, and we do want to make sure that organizations who are interested in this really do have the capacity to support. It's not a fun situation when districts get turned down and they're interested in working with TA providers, and we want to avoid that. So please don't feel like you need to stretch this on your application. We really do want you to be transparent about this for the sake of our district so that we don't get into any challenges there. For similar to our districts, and you'll see some parallels with what we're asking districts versus what we're asking potential approved providers. We'll ask for a primary point of contact so that we know who to reach out to at your organization as we're going through this application and then grant process. We will have a set of required TA trainings that we'll be asking approved providers or potential approved providers to both attend and show mastery of, and we'll do a deeper dive into some of these trainings later on in this presentation. But these trainings will really equip all of our interested vendors with some of the information that's coming out from TA. So you've heard me say RBs a lot and research-based instructional strategies. Those are things that are developed by TA, and we want to make sure that you've got that same information. You have to have the ability to contract directly with awarded districts and provide services that you're approved for, but also that are aligned to the actual grant opportunity. And in the application, we're going to be asking for some things to support in that process and making that process pretty quick. Because if you look at that timeline, the contracting process we're hoping happens in about 1 to 2 months. The district RFP process is all over the board, so they may be able to bypass it, and we're going to provide the right forms so that they can get hopefully that non-competitive procurement. But districts can't always bypass that, so it may just be a longer runway for some. So to help expedite that process, we're going to ask vendors in their application to submit a sample contract, and that can really just be the task plan so that we can do some quick alignment up front to make sure we've got the right components in there, and then you can really just turnkey that contract as you start the work. And then we'll be asking to submit, just so that we can help and you track districts that you're engaging with, a summary tracker of districts that you're working with and what components you're contracting for. We are going to ask that we get submission of all of the signed contracts so that we can keep record of those and make sure that those are in place. And then we'll likely ask you all to attend a couple focus groups. One thing that we're really trying to continuously improve at the agency is the thing I called of this district procurement process, because we know that's tricky for a lot of these grants we're putting out. And we think there's a lot to learn there. So we're going to pull on you all to make sure that we've got the right information there to be able to update our own processes. And then this is more of a recommended thing, but I mentioned on a previous slide that you are welcome to learn more by attending our district facing opportunities. We will have all of those posted on a Strong Foundations website that is hopefully going up here in a couple hours, but we'll make sure to send that out in the follow-up email. So please feel free to send that out to your organization, attend those, just a reminder to be observers at those opportunities. So digging into what this work actually looks like, you're going to see a lot of parallels between that 5-step process I went through earlier that districts will be engaging in with what these non-negotiables look like here. So for step 1, which is creating that roadmap, we're going to be asking approved providers and ESCs to help districts build out a committee to help them with this framework development process and backwards planning from some of those key dates. And then actually helping them scope out their own decision-making process. So we see this creating a roadmap stage as you working very, very closely with your district to understand their local context, to help them build out a comprehensive plan. We'll be providing a template for this roadmap. So again, you can use that to turnkey that with your districts. We know that there's going to be a level of customization that's required depending on your district's local context. So we'll provide all the resources for that to happen there. That step 2 is building out a communications plan. So approved providers or ESCs will be required to submit that final communications plan that includes some key criteria that's listed here. Step 3 is this collective learning series. So again, approved providers will be the ones actually delivering this collective learning series and making some customizations depending on what the district needs. So a district may really want to hone in on a specific component of the research that either they're having trouble with within their district currently, making some of those shifts. So you can kind of play and customize the professional learning series a little bit with that. And we'll speak more to this when we get to the training section as well. And then step 4 is actually developing this framework. So again, this is going to be a lot of leadership coaching back and forth and iterating on different drafts and actually helping the districts get to this final framework that is research-based that can be adopted by the district and fits their local context. So there's a couple more details there that I'll let you read through on your own so that we get through everything today. And then we're going to be asking for an implementation plan. So we'll be creating a memo or a template for approved providers and ESCs to work with their districts to actually build out an implementation plan. We want to be able to see that districts are really invested in making sure that this is a living document that continues on within their district. So that'll be one of the final main deliverables that a district will go through as part of this grant opportunity. And then there's some things down here that we're classifying as general support. So we want to be able to see some of the highlights that's happening in districts. And we often, with large grants like this, don't get to hone in on individual districts as much as we wish we could. So we're going to be asking for each of these key deliverables that approved providers or ESCs submit exemplars, at least 1 or 2 as we're going, so that we can start to build a portfolio of some of these really great exemplars that we can learn from and continue to evolve and improve our own tools, but also let other districts see those so that they can learn from it as well. And then there's this case study component, and this will come much later, really after they've gotten their final framework, where you all will be building out in coordination with them a case study that recounts their process from start to finish. And then a little bit more forward-looking of how to stay on the list. So there's a couple implications here because we will be rolling this into that larger Strong Foundations grant program. So I'll speak to that at the bottom here. But some quick hits on things to stay on the list is you do need to attend any future trainings that are required by TEA to support the framework development process. Something that we really want to invest in with this grant is making sure that all of our ESCs and approved providers have the most up-to-date information and that it's aligned with what TEA is putting out as well. So we're going to be doing a lot of trainings this fall to make sure that we've got capacity within our approved providers as well as with our ESCs. We will be asking approved providers to actually evaluate the math and literacy framework. So again, that is our end goal. And we'll be pulling on you all to actually evaluate how good the framework is based on a set of key criteria that we'll develop. And then we'll have a set of vendor performance metrics Most of these are pretty straightforward and are rooted back to satisfaction, the quality of the actual frameworks that are produced within the districts you're working with. And then we have one down here that's more specific to complaints. We don't want this to happen, but we know sometimes that districts can be unhappy with their services. So we will be setting up a system for districts to submit complaints with approved providers or ESCs that we're working with. And we want to see those complaints resolved pretty quickly. So we'll be tracking at a high level these metrics to make sure that all of our approved provider network is staying on track as they're supporting our districts. And then this last one is more of a plug for what's coming in the future with the Strong Foundation's larger grant program. So we want to be able to see that this initial approved provider list that we create has the ability to serve potentially a broader set of supports that I mentioned on that earlier slide with the 3 big buckets. Ideally, and we know that this is a long ways to get there, but ideally we want to get to a point where a district can actually work with a single vendor for all of those aligned supports. When we have our district hat on, that would really help districts in a lot of different ways, because one of the key things we've heard is they love the supports, but it's a real challenge for districts to work with 4, 5, sometimes 6 different vendors across a variety of initiatives. So a lot of the push for some of the trainings and the capacity building is to get to this level where we can offer this bundled supports moving forward over the next 2 to 3 years, and just have districts get really close with one approved vendor and ESC, and that's the person they're working with throughout this process from start to finish. So again, that's the ideal. There are some barriers to getting there, and there's some trainings that are going to be required, but I wanted to give you guys a heads up of the broader picture and what we're moving towards. Before we dig into part 3 of this, which is the actual application, I wanted to do a quick recap of what it means to get on the Strong Foundation's approved provider list. And again, this is a new, previously we've called it state approved vendor list. I've heard it called, I think RSSP calls it a TAP or TA provider list. So this one is the Strong Foundation's approved provider list. This is a new state approved vendor list that the agency will be putting out, and it's going to be comprehensive of both third-party providers as well as ESCs. So it's going to be a mix of those that districts will have the option of choosing from. Those who are interested and want to be on this list will have to submit a digital application. Like I mentioned, we'll be asking for a primary point of contact so we know who to reach out to within your organization, complete a set of training requirements offered by the agency, and then actually contract with LEAs for services that are approved for through that application process. So I'm going to pause there again before we get into some more of the weeds of the actual application and see if there's any other questions. Free to come off mute or drop it in the chat. Okay, question in the chat about will they choose their own vendor? Yes, they will. So we won't be pairing them up. They'll have the opportunity to choose any provider ESC that's approved to work with. Rachel, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, they're open opportunities, so feel free to share them if you think they may be helpful. I will say the framing is going to be obviously geared towards this grant and this type of work, but those opportunities are available. And if they're looking more towards that second option, definitely encourage them to attend those so that they can start to get a taste of if this is something they're interested in. It's not highlighted here, but we'll likely offer a similar suite of learning opportunities for districts in the fall in preparation for that option 2 timeline, but it just isn't as relevant for today. So feel free to let them know about those. Okay, I'm going to keep plugging through and then drop any questions off in the chat. So before we get into some of the details of the application, again, I'm somebody who likes to start from the high level and then dig in a bit deeper. But ideally, we're looking for TA providers that have more or less this checklist of expertise and previous experience working in Texas before. So we're going to be looking for TA providers that have experience delivering high quality professional learning specific in math or literacy. We will be approving vendors for a subject area. So you can be approved for math, you can be approved for literacy, or you can be approved for both if you complete the training requirements for that. With that comes, we want you to be content experts in math or literacy, and we're going to be providing a lot of training to help with that. But we want to make sure that you can also walk the talk and be able to really engage with districts and dig in with this work that is very subject specific. And that content expertise that you have is also aligned to the research that's coming out on how students learn in those subject areas. They have a track record of strong project management and stakeholder engagement. They have experience coaching district leadership and building relationships quickly. That you can build organizational capacity to support this work at scale. Texas is a big state. We've got a lot of districts, and this is a big grant opportunity. And again, want to make sure that all approved providers that are applying for this feel like they can staff up and support districts. Previous experience working in Texas. Again, we're a special state that I love very much, but it's just a different landscape. So we want to make sure that you've had some experience working with our Texas districts before, and that you've had evidence or can showcase positive impact of previous work with districts. So that's kind of icing on top if you are able to show and display that the work that you do with Texas districts or nationally has the outcomes that we're looking for. So starting with the application process, so like I mentioned, we will be releasing a digital application that all interested TA providers will need to apply for. We are going to be releasing this on Friday, so we're just putting up the final touches on it, and then we'll send out an email to everybody who attended this call and everybody that's on our radar to let them know that this is open. And we're going to close that at the end of July. So July 22nd is when we're going to close this digital application. And then in early August is when we're going to start posting the Strong Foundations approved provider list so that districts who are in that earlier option, if you go back to the timeline, can start looking at who's on the list and start thinking about and talking to potential TA providers that they want to work with. This will be comprehensive of everybody we approve through this digital application, but I do want to make a very clear call out here that we will be removing any TA providers that do not complete the training requirements by September 2nd. And that's to support districts in this first timing option, and that's the one we're really focusing on today. We will have some later training requirements if you're more interested in supporting districts in that option 2 winter timeline. And we'll share out some more information later on that, but this is really focusing on getting support for districts that are going to be engaging in this work in the fall. We will be releasing, along with that digital application, an application guide, and this is a much longer document that's going to go into a lot more of the background about this grant, more an overview of the project, highlight some key dates, training requirements with detailed information, the scoring rubric we're going to use for the application. So all of that will be in a PDF that you'll have access to and can fill in a lot of those questions when you download that before you actually put them into the digital application if you need to work across your organization to get that information together. I do want to call out that this application guide is not the actual application. Please, please, please do not email Victoria or myself or the email we have set up for this grant program with a filled out Word document of this application. We will not process it. We will not look at it. You need to complete the digital application. And that's how we're going to be scoring and actually approving TA providers through that process. Once we get all of those applications in, we're really going to be looking in 3 big buckets to actually make the call on whether a TA provider is approved to support districts in this work. So we're going to look at do you actually agree to the assurances that we laid out on the previous slides? So we want to make sure that you're on board with all the things that we're saying need to happen. I keep honing in on capacity because we know that's a challenge right now, but we want to make sure that all organizations have the capacity or the ability to build capacity to support districts in this work. And then we'll have a set of free response and qualitative as well as artifact submission in the actual application, and we'll be scoring that against a standard rubric that you will have access to on Friday. that allows us to be able to score across all of our approved providers or potential approved providers to make a call on which ones we think are fit to support districts in this work. And then part 2 of this is these required trainings. So again, and once you get that application guide, there's going to be a much more detailed view of this. But I wanted to just preview this at a high level. So if you are really interested in getting your team ready for this work, that you can start to look at calendars and block off times for this. But we will be providing a suite of trainings over the summer, so running from about July through the beginning of September to support districts in this option 1 grant timeline. There's really 3 key trainings we're going to ask that all potential providers complete ahead of September 2nd. The first of those is the research-based instructional strategies, or we call them the RBs, which is a terrible name, but that's the name that we use now, in math and literacy. And again, this is where if your organization is applying to just math, then you'll just have to complete math ones. If they're applying to just literacy. If you do want to be able to support both, then you will have to attend both trainings, and we'll offer timelines for both. With these RBs trainings, there's actually 2 different versions of these that your organization will probably have to divide and conquer between. On this table here to the right, we put the personnel description because this doesn't necessarily need to be 1 person or 2 people, and you can decide how to build up a team and people to support district through this work. But we want to have one type of person that actually leads the district through the math or literacy framework creation and provides any district-facing support related to the grant. So people who fit that profile that are going to be supporting through your organization through this grant will need to complete the RBs in math or literacy, depending on, again, what you're applying for and what you're approved for. And then we'll have a training, as a 2-part trainings that's going to be specific to developing an instructional framework. So part 1 is launching the framework process. Part 2 is actually developing an instructional framework. And then we've also got the people who are actually going to be leading districts through this collective learning series. So these are your trainers that are going to be re-delivering those RBs. We are going to have a trainer of trainers session available for both math and literacy, so that those who are going to actually be engaged in re-delivering these sessions are equipped to turnkey the resources, have the knowledge to customize and tweak for the local context of the district, and provide a really effective learning series for districts on the research of how kids learn, again, in math or literacy. So we'll have various options for those as we go as well. And then for this person, or again, this can be the same person, you guys can decide how to staff up for this and where to assign within your organization. We will be having some ongoing coaching and support opportunities to make sure that those that are actually taking districts through that collective learning series are really equipped for the work. And we'll be putting them through a certification process as well to re-deliver the RBs. I see a couple of questions in the chat. So these trainings are going to be live, but a mix between virtual and in-person opportunities. So we are trying to, I don't have dates on these yet for our RBs because we're putting the final bow on this hopefully this week. But we will be offering some in-person opportunities if you want to come out to the TEA office and actually engage in an in-person option for these RBs trainings. We know that this is a national group of folks here on the call, and if it is not possible for you to get to Austin in these crazy flight cost times, which I feel, we will have a virtual option as well if that's a better fit for you to still go through the trainings. So we'll have a couple different timing options there that you can choose from. And then for the framework development 2-part trainings, those will be entirely virtual. So those will be live, but there'll be a virtual option. So again, you can hop on from wherever you guys are headquartered or your team lives. And then just a quick note here that when we look towards the future, when we get to the option 2 and more of this bundled supports, we likely will have additional training requirements as we go. Again, we're really trying to make sure that we're building a lot of capacity for a variety of folks to support districts in Texas. So we're going to be providing some ongoing trainings as we go, and especially as we roll into this larger Strong Foundations grant program. And then just another quick plug down here that these trainings are required to support districts in that option timing 1. And if a vendor gets through that first application phase, but does not complete these trainings, we will remove you from the final list. That is not a fun situation for districts if they were interested in working with you and then they get plucked from the list in September. So please just make sure that you're really making the decision organizationally of if you can complete all of these required trainings ahead of time so that we don't put ourselves in that situation. It's going to be on the next slide, Carrie, so I'm going to wait about 10 seconds. Okay, so this is a bit more detailed of a look of these trainings. So we'll have the Math and RLA Research-Based Instructional Strategies, or RBES trainings. This is going to be a 3-day in-person or virtual training for both Math and RLA respectively. So both subject areas will be a total of 3 days separately. I don't know if I'm saying that super clearly, but it'll be 6 days if you're doing both trainings. And you'll have the option again to do it in person or virtual. The structure of these trainings is days 1 and 2 are going to be essentially a deep dive on the instructional strategies themselves. So this is going to be a very in-depth training, and then day 3 is going to be more focused on actually getting those who are going to be redelivering the right information to turnkey those trainings, do a quick session on effective adult learning practices, and then practice a redelivery, and then we'll have some ongoing coaching opportunities after the fact as well. And then these framework development trainings, the part 1 and 2 will be virtual. These are the dates we're going to be offering them. So there's 2 different options for each training you can attend. Do recommend you take these in sequence. It would be a little awkward if you did them backwards. So try and plan them that way where you can attend the training 1 first and then the training 2 second. And then we have already scoped out some additional upcoming trainings for this fall. We haven't pinned down dates for these because these are coming a little bit later, but wanted to go ahead and give you all a heads up that they're coming. We have seen a lot of districts take their framework and kind of transition this into a materials adoption process, knowing that that process can be really quick once they have an aligned and agreed upon framework. And we want to make sure that districts who are moving towards that path have access to those supports through the ESC or provider that they selected to work with. And we want to make sure that all of our providers and ESCs are also equipped to support districts in that way. So we're going to shift our focus a little bit in training later in the fall to be more focused on materials adoption trainings. These will be, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, but 3 to 4 hour virtual trainings that will sprinkle out over the course of the fall. And we'll really equip TA providers and ESCs to support districts once they get to that adoption phase. Okay, I know we've got 5 minutes left. We'll be sending out registration information soon, so you'll have access to these slides. Block it off in your calendar if this is something that you're interested in, but we will be sending out formal registration links so that you can get signed up on this very soon. And then in terms of next steps, just as a quick recap of the lots of information that we've shared today, make sure that when we send out the actual application that you take some time to review that application guide, reach out if you have questions about that. We'll be sending this out on Friday, so just keep a heads up for that. If there is somebody from your organization that you want to receive it, that's not you, please let us know. We can adjust our listserv as needed. And we'll also include a link to this recording in case you want to share that throughout your organization. Obviously, we'd love for everybody to apply that's interested in this opportunity. We're going to close that digital application on July 22nd. So make sure that all of the application materials are uploaded by that point. And then like we highlighted, there's going to be a lot of kind of learn more opportunities that are district facing, but encourage you to attend those. So you can also learn more as an organization and see if this is something that you want to engage in. And I think it's also a helpful gauge of district interest that may help your organization's decision to be a part of this opportunity as well. And then if you apply and are approved, please attend those required trainings. So block those off on your team's calendars if this is something that you're really interested in. And we'll be sending out registration links shortly so that you can formally get that on your calendars. I know we just have about 3 minutes left, but I want to open it up for any last minute questions. We have created an email account for this grant opportunity specifically, so please feel free to reach out to this. It goes to my entire team so we can help field questions quickly. And then we also have this QR code link if you've got just larger questions or questions we don't get to today, and we'll create an FAQ from those and respond to ones that are more time sensitive. But with our last 2 minutes, I'd love to open it up to any quick questions you guys have in the meantime. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I will stay on until at least noon and probably a couple minutes after. If you do want to drop and don't have any other questions, feel free to. We will be sending out this recording, the slides, and lots of information on Friday. So just be on the lookout for that and reach out if you have any other questions.